Welcome to a special edition of Legal AF with the government about to reopen, but on a deal that has people on at least one side of the aisle not pleased, although it has aspects of it that will help Americans in terms of the SNAP anti-starvation payments that look like they'll be made and won't be withheld. But then we had a whole series of litigation matters up at two different judges in the New England area, the First Circuit Court of Appeals, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and then the United States Supreme Court voted to starve Americans. I want to bring in somebody who's on the front lines. This is one of the first responders, along with the other Democratic attorneys general, Attorney General Matt Platkin from New Jersey, my home state, the Garden State. I want to bring in Matt to talk to our audience and brief them about what happened up with the case that was filed in front of Judge Talwani. That was your case, how that dovetailed with the case that was filed by the public interest groups in front of Judge McConnell. And maybe give a little insider view as to the reasoning in terms of having those two cases. I saw it as a classic pincher moment where you're putting Donald Trump in a vice with two different judges. But I want to hear your view on that. And then the First Circuit came out with an amazing decision, 23-page decision, all in favor of the states in your position. Then the Supreme Court. Then let's pick up with, why isn't the reopening of the government such a great thing, or is it a great thing? I want to hear it from your view and for the people that you represent in the state of New Jersey. Welcoming Attorney General Matt Platkin. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's great to be with you again.
Great to be back with you here, and we'll see each other. As our audience knows, I'm going to be in Scottsdale, Arizona for a conference of Democratic Attorneys General next week, and I'm going to have Attorney General Platkin, and along with 10 others that are going to be in various formats. We're going to be doing some interviews in person there, and then bring it back to our Legal AF audience. But let's pick it up. You want to start with the lawsuits that you helped lead?
Sure. Can I also just say, as a fellow Jersey guy, I appreciate that you abbreviate your title, but for us, it wouldn't offend our sensibilities if you didn't in New Jersey. I think we can all agree with that.
What's the title?
The Legal AF part. You're allowed to say that in New Jersey. We welcome it.
I like that's the first time I've ever been called out on the AF part. Okay.
Hey, I get it. You probably got some people who are more sensitive, not in New Jersey. Let's be clear about that.
Agreed.
Look, this lawsuit, we filed a lot of lawsuits, obviously, over the course of the last year. A number of them shocked me that I had to put my name to papers. I didn't think I'd ever have to sue the federal government to keep 12,000 machine guns from being distributed by the federal government into New Jersey. That is a real lawsuit we filed. You've covered all of them. This one takes the cake, though. And you talk about the two lawsuits, states and the private individuals who filed their suit. We have somewhat different interests, but at the end of the day, we were both fighting about whether the federal government could refuse to use funds that Congress specifically put in place during an emergency so that people didn't starve. They bent themselves backwards. They were like the best gymnasts I've ever seen, trying to come up with a way to keep Americans from eating. In New Jersey, over 800,000 people, 350,000 children. I'm sitting in Newark, the largest city in my state. There are more kids in New Jersey on SNAP than there are people who live in the largest city in New Jersey. And yet for the first third of the month, this federal government seemed to almost take joy in the fact that they were starving them. So that's what those cases were about. We were obviously right on the law. A bunch of the back and forth was about the insane things they were doing. I joked that it felt like a high school intern was running their SNAP analysis, because the way they were telling us to process these payments, I'm sure they had never possibly looked at the payment systems we have. So it was chaos day in and day out for now well over 2 weeks. Leading up, 3 weeks really leading up to this crisis, which they knew was coming. They could have addressed it. They could have said, yes, we're at a shutdown. Yes, we're dealing with a political debate in Washington, but we're not going to starve kids. We're not going to starve seniors. We're not going to starve veterans as they did on Veterans Day. Over 1 million veterans in this country are on SNAP.
How about when the president trolled those that are impoverished and below the poverty line and receive SNAP payments on Election Day, telling them that he was going to defy the court orders that were in place at that time, and that he was not going to pay SNAP, trying to put the blame on the Democrats for starving people. And how did that go on election night?
Yeah, not so well. And think about this. On Friday, they lose in court. USDA, I give them credit for this, sends out pretty clear guidance saying, actually very clear guidance in writing, saying, go ahead and make the full payment. We're going to process it. Seems like a humane thing to do when a court told you don't starve people, that they're going to process the payments. So what did we, the responsible states, do? We didn't wait a second. We won that case. We got the guidance. We made sure people had money for food. And then the next day, they say, wait a second, what you did was improper. We're going to not only make you take that money back, which you can't do, we're going to punish you to the fullest extent of the law for complying with a court order and for obeying the guidance that we ourselves issued 24 hours earlier.
And I assume the reason for that, and you and I can do a little nerd out here on the legal side, is that once Donald Trump and others figured out that the payment had been made almost in full, that undermined their emergency application on their appeal to the United States Supreme Court, takes it out of the other funding type cases from the summer and the spring, because we're talking about we already made the money, we already made the payments, as opposed to don't make us make the payment. And so I think that's why they just decided to scramble and try to claw it back, right?
Look, it could be just a general dysfunction within the federal government when you're trying to move this quick on something this serious. 42 million Americans. I don't know, and I've long since tried to get in the heads of the folks who go into court and make these arguments, but argument after argument, and I have to thank our teams and teams in our offices across the country. They worked literally through the night for several nights running because they felt the weight of pressure of making sure people could eat. And I don't understand. I went to law school. I chose to go into public service. I took the same oaths these folks did. What part of that oath says you will use the privilege of power that you have to starve children? How do you get up every morning and think that's what you should use your legal skills for? No one had the conscience to say, wait a second, guys, this has gone too far. We've told people they could eat. We're going to make sure that they eat. We're not going to do this. No one did that.
No. Instead, they decided we have to continue to try to pin this, even though the polling says it's not working, on the Democrats, and we're going to starve people in between. I mean, as you're properly pointing out, there's a human dimension here. And I've said one thing in a recent hot take, which is America does not tolerate a president with no heart, right? He doesn't have a brain. I feel like we're in the Wizard of Oz again. He doesn't have a brain and he doesn't have heart. And you know what you know from history, what we do with heartless presidents, we run them out on the rail. And he doesn't seem to realize that the political narrative has shifted underneath his feet since he was first elected. All of that, whatever happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, and I'm a crypto king, and I'm going to make a lot of money for my family, haha, all the Trump stuff that people put up with. Once you got into a crushing economy for the American people, and then add to it, we're going to abuse the most poor in our society. I think that's a bridge too far for most Americans, and the polling is showing it, isn't it?
Look, I mean, I'll leave it to experts to decide where the public is. But to the extent people went to the polls and said, something I agree with, by the way, raising 2 kids, that the cost of everything is too high. I don't think they were saying, take away my food assistance. I don't think they were saying, when I get to the checkout counter at the grocery store after 10 days of having my food unlawfully withheld by my government, the government that I pay taxes to, that when they finally tell me I can get that food for my kids, then I'm going to swipe that card and it's not going to work. I don't think that was anybody's political mandate. And it certainly isn't what the law allows. So, I mean, look, Congress is dysfunctional. I think we all can agree to that. It's been dysfunctional for a long time. The Republicans in Congress have ceded essentially the entire authority that they have been given by James Madison and others in the Constitution to this president. That fight is playing out, and apparently it's coming to an end. That is one thing. It is a whole different thing to tell people we are going to weaponize their food against them to make sure that we win a political fight that they can't win in chambers where they have majorities. These are not like they're fighting against super majorities of the other party. They can't make a case for what they want to get done. So what did they do? They starved kids.
Yeah. There's an argument they control all 3 branches of the government, at least up to the Supreme Court level. On the in the First Circuit opinion, I mean, the majority opinion was, which was a 3-0. The unanimous opinion of the court talked about food security and how This is a fundamental right in America. And when you take away food security, it has emotional and physical and health impacts in a cascading way. And I think that put in sharp relief the lack of morals, as you sort of outlined it, of one of the two parties right now.
Look, I've seen it time and again. When you spend too much time in that bubble down in DC, you forget what it is that you're doing. And, I live in the real world. I'm out in communities and food banks where we saw huge surges of people showing up. There's consequences when you do things like this, unprecedented things. The first time ever since the SNAP was a thing, and let's not get lost in an acronym. SNAP is about making sure the most vulnerable among us, and it's not even that few, 42 million people, can put food on the table for their kids. As a parent, put aside my legal training, my title, whatever, I cannot fathom how you could do that. And I can tell you the public servants that I work with, they were nauseous over what was happening. The fear that the people who were not even responsible for making the decision, but that we wouldn't be able to deliver on our mandate, which is to deliver money to those cards so people can get food. And I don't know how you get to the point where you lose all sense of perspective to say, this is what politics is supposed to be. This is what politics is supposed to be. Politics is about helping people. It's certainly not about weaponizing food and what people have in their refrigerator in order to score a political point. Again, that you can't even make through the legal channels that you have available to you.
And signaling, from the Trump administration, signaling that in future fights over future shutdowns, they're willing to go there. They're willing to go to the dark place they are not supposed to ever go, the third rail, which is to torment and starve the most underprivileged in America. And the rest of us that have the benefit of not being that underprivileged, we generally want to wrap our arms around our fellow American and bring them closer. That's why we look for a president. I don't need him to be the consoler in chief, but I need him to have a heart to understand that this is so depraved that even he should not go there. And yet, as you said, they're so in the bubble. It's like, I think about it as you were mentioning about that they're so upside down, they don't know what they're doing. It's like those pilots that accidentally flip upside down and don't realize they're upside down when they're flying before a crash because they've lost all bearings. This party has lost its bearings, the Republican Party, for me.
Yeah, and look, and I think the public agrees with this notion. Like, I heard from people across my state that just were in shock. They said, even people who were not on the program, they were like, wait a second, what? People aren't going to get their food? And that's why this lawsuit is so important, because it is the case that it should never be allowed again. And I would hope there's bipartisan agreement. By the way, there were bipartisan condemnation. I didn't see the White House respond to that. Food security doesn't know which party registration you have. I don't know which of the 350,000 kids that their parents are Democrats, Independents, or Republicans. I don't care. They're entitled to not starve in this country. I don't even, it's sort of laughing saying it because it's such an absurd thing. And it would be a joke if it wasn't so serious and scary because how serious they tried to do this. And remember, they were doing this in order to put pressure on a political party to jack up your healthcare costs.
Right.
Like,
harm the very same people again.
Look, again, a lot smarter people in politics than me. I didn't have to get elected. I don't know. That seems like a pretty crazy thing to do. And it certainly is an illegal thing to do. If they want to win that fight, if they want to go to the mat to raise your healthcare costs by, in some cases, thousands of percents, go for it. That is a policy call that they can fight on. I think they should lose. It's a policy call that they can fight on. They can't say to 42 million Americans, in order to win this fight, we're going to make sure that you go so hungry that you don't have anything in your fridge, that you can't go to the grocery store for, in this case, about a third of a month.
Yeah.
It's astonishing how we got here.
So let's talk about the bill that's going to reopen the government if it gets passed with this very slim majority in the House, which got a lot slimmer since Representative Grijalva from the 7th in Arizona looks like will be sworn in or has been sworn in, and she's one of the voters there. So Mike Johnson is down to like 3, 4. I mean, a very small majority, but not everybody's happy with the bill that the Senate and the moderate 8, led by Chuck Schumer, put together, delaying the vote on Obamacare until December. for the people of the state of New Jersey, what's your view?
I mean, look, I've been fighting for the rule of law alongside my colleagues in attorneys general's offices across the country since January 20th. We have not been afraid to fight for things that matter to people's lives, things like their healthcare, their education, food security, law enforcement, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. You name it, we've had to sue over it. I don't know why you go to Washington to roll over. That's not why I went into public service. And it's not like I wake up every morning dying to fight with the president, but when he is unlawfully gutting things that affect 9.5 million people in my state, that's what I took an oath to do. And nobody likes a shutdown. Nobody wants a shutdown to happen. But you went to the mat on something that was important, whether or not people can afford the most fundamental thing in their life, which should be a human right in this country, their right to healthcare. And there's a lot of people in my state and states across the country as a result of this deal who are not going to be able to afford their healthcare. And that pains me. And I just got to say, when you read some of these details, the idea that in the dark of the night, the majority leader slips in a provision that allows a handful of senators retroactively to collect hundreds of thousands or millions, whatever it is, dollars of taxpayer dollars because they feel aggrieved based on something the Department of Justice did. I mean, you talk about corruption and why people have no faith in our government. They didn't go to the mat to make sure people could eat. They didn't go to the mat to make sure people could afford their health care, but they sure as hell made sure that they could make hundreds of thousands of dollars on our backs based on some bogus theory of how they were harmed. That is what corruption is. That is not the rule of law.
I mean, as a perfect example, Donald Trump stayed at Mar-a-Lago playing golf, while others tried to reopen the government and stop people from starving. But as soon as he's back, the first thing he's able to pull a group together to figure out how to bury the Epstein Files, about how to get right. There's public reporting. He's getting a group together to talk about the discharge petition that Grijalva is going to sign and how to kill it. I mean, so he's worried about what's in the Epstein Files, but he's not worried about what's in Americans' bellies, to start their day. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm with you. There was a better way. This is the second time I've seen Chuck Schumer do something like this. The big, beautiful bill. He did something also and got a lot of flack for it. Didn't seem to have learned from that. I think there was a better way to hang in there and not harm the American people. And I don't want to let the Supreme Court off the hook either. We didn't touch on that. Your group, of which you were a major part, led the fight with Judge Talwani. The McConnell order coming out of Rhode Island ended up on appeal after the First Circuit ruled in his favor to force the $8 billion to be paid in November in full. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson stayed it for a day or two to give the First Circuit time to issue their ruling. They issued a scathing ruling in support of McConnell and your position and against the Trump position. They ran to the United States Supreme Court for permission to starve people. And it was referred to the full court. And they decided to stay it until Thursday night, till tomorrow night, to see if, I guess, talk about playing politics, which the court is not supposed to do, to see if the political winds will change and the bill will reopen and they won't have to make a decision about SNAP. But in the meantime, another 2 days of food insecurity for 42 million people, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, by the way, when you were talking about the president golfing during a shutdown, I don't know how close he and Chris Christie are anymore. He might want to ask his old friend about doing a recreational activity like playing golf or going to a beach during a shutdown and how the public feels about that. But the Supreme Court, Congress, Supreme Court, everyone wants to dodge an issue. People want to say, oh, we'll deal with this later. At the end of the day, this court could have spoken quite clearly and say, no, we have contingency funds for a reason. Look, contingency funds is a fancy way of saying you prepare for a difficult moment, right? We all do it. Like if we have a leak in our house, we have some funds if we're fortunate enough to make sure that we can plug that leak. Or if our kids get sick, we prepare for that rainy day. The Congress did that too for SNAP. They said there's going to be money in the event of an emergency or a shutdown or whatever that we make sure people can eat. So the court could have said very clearly and could have taken this moment to say, like, wait a second. All the other things that we've blessed, this is not okay. And don't do this ever again. The law doesn't allow it. We're going to be quite clear about this. And instead, what did they do? Yeah, they played their, three-dimensional chess about how they move issues to make sure that they avoid confrontation with this administration. We're
Right.
seeing it time and time again, and it's not right. They could have settled this issue, and that did bother me as someone who was staying up all night putting those papers together with my team and teams across this country to make sure people could eat.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you alluded to, it emboldens the Trump administration and Trump to do it again, because he keeps getting, every time he pushes that button that's marked Supreme Court, 86% of the time he gets a positive result. So, right, he's going to keep doing it. Fortunately, you and your group are winning at 90% rate below. The public interest groups, same thing. But, again, the Supreme Court doesn't have the back of the lower courts. All of a sudden, the lower courts are dummies who can't figure out how to read statutes and the Constitution. And only the Supreme Court 9 or 6 know how to properly read it, which is a terrible place for federal judges to be. I mean, we just had a senior federal judge, Mark Wolf, resign in Massachusetts, just can't take it anymore, and wants to be on the other side critiquing the Trump administration rather than from his perch as a senior status judge. But the Supreme Court has an opportunity. And I was hoping, and I had my own little dialogue with the Supreme Court on a prior hot take. Now is the chance to look the American people in the eye and say that you're against starving Americans. Go. And of course, they went the other way.
Yeah. Look, I said since day one, if the president wants to do things I don't agree with, but he does it legally, that's his right.
That's
policy. We all have things we don't agree with that people do. He doesn't have the right to starve people and withhold funds that keep food in people's fridges. The court could have just said that. It wouldn't have been a hard thing to do. As you noted, the First Circuit issued a really reasoned opinion. The judge Judge McConnell asked them, give me different options. How can you do this? They didn't even bother to have an idea of how they would do it. And this is a pattern. The same thing in our birthright case when they said, we should judge citizenship based on which state you're born. And we said, how do you actually expect states to do that? And they never, in that whole case, ever put forth an answer because they're not serious people. They're not trying to be serious before bodies that I respect and that I believe you should be serious for. And I certainly respect the American people and the people of my state enough to say, if I'm going to do something this drastic, I want to make sure it's legal and we know how we're going to do it. Now, I would never try to withhold food from people, but anything we do this every day in government. The lack of care for how this disrupts people's lives is truly astonishing. And I'm long past the point of hoping they wake up and have a come to Jesus moment and look themselves in the mirror and say, what am I doing here? But maybe somebody somewhere can talk some sense into somebody, because there were people in USDA on Friday who read that opinion and said, right, court ruled, let's tell them we're going to make the payments. That's the legal and right thing to do. And they did that. And then clearly somebody else saw it, probably got a little mad at whoever issued that. And what did they do? They said, we're going to punish the states that made sure people within the compliance of the court order and our guidance got people food. We're going to punish them to the fullest extent of the law. And we're not even going to say what we think they did wrong.
I had Rob Bonta, your colleague in California, the Attorney General, on. He said anecdotally there were cases in his state where vendors, where the merchants, even though the card had enough money on it, they were scared to take it because they feared they'd be doing something criminal under the Trump administration. So somebody would show up with their $350 or whatever it was to buy the milk and the bread and the eggs and the basic sustenance, and the merchant said, I'm not taking this card right now.
Yeah.
I mean, right? I mean, just really, really terrible. One of the things I like to do when I have somebody who's a leader like you with the attorneys general on is you have a lot of cases out there. What else is on the horizon that our audience should be keeping an eye on in some of your other cases?
How much time do we have?
We'll always have you back.
Yeah.
Is there one in particular that you think is coming up that we should keep an eye on?
Well, the federal government has filed cert petition on the Washington's. We had 2 birthright cases. I'm really proud of the work we did. That case still astonishes me that 8 p.m. on the first day in office, the president rewrote the 14th Amendment to deprive people the citizenship that we settled after a civil war. So we're certainly watching that closely. But I also want to make a point about the work we do as AGs. Mm-hmm. I don't just sue the president of the United States. We are stepping up our responsibility because we're doing our jobs when the federal government has essentially stopped keeping you safe. The federal government, the Department of Justice, which was created to protect people's civil rights, no longer doing that. Guess what? We are. I sued Amazon just recently for widespread pregnancy discrimination. We've stepped up gun violence, safest state in the country. You're 6 times more likely to be shot and killed in Mississippi than you are in New Jersey. We're holding accountable social media companies and tech platforms that are hurting our kids. We're doing the work here. And I just wish the federal government would do their part. And we could do a whole lot more of it if I wasn't having to make sure that they were shutting off food stamps or education funds or healthcare funds or firing law enforcement officers, all of the things that we've had to sue over. So it's hard to give you one because we've been busy. But it is important for folks to know that we're not stopping doing our jobs here. And I wish the federal government would do theirs.
Yeah, that's a really good point, AG Platkin, because we do see the hollowing out of the Department of Justice. We don't have a civil rights division. We don't have a public integrity division, or they've been weaponized and they're turned on the very people who they should be protecting. And
they're going to be processing claims from senators now, paying
right,
millions of dollars.
The Democrats had in the bill during the budget negotiations, they wanted to put in a very good idea to put a fund together for people who were being the targets of the Trump administration. So they had a legal defense fund. Now that made a lot of sense. Of course, that didn't get put in. And Thune's like, let's be fair. The reason those senators or congresspeople had a search warrant for their phone records issued through a federal judge is because the special counsel was looking into what role they had to try to slow down and interfere with the peaceful transfer of power. And if they had any connections with the fake electors or with people in the inner circle of Donald Trump, what were they doing? Not because they were doing honest service for the American people, but in a corrupt way to help Donald Trump overthrow democracy. That is a legitimate investigative tool that was used, affirmed by judges and grand juries and judges and the rest. So if they found themselves in the midst of a criminal investigation, that's because they did something that warranted having a further look under the hood. To give them now $500,000 because we figured out that for 22 minutes there was a phone call between X and Y on January the 5th or January the 6th or January the 7th it just shows you how, as you said, how corrupt the party is.
Yeah, look, I don't think there's any surprise that the public is at historic lows in trusting government when they see charades like this. Look, I'm from New Jersey. We have an unfortunate history here of corruption. We see it. We still see it to this day. And, my office takes prosecuting and holding corrupt actors really seriously. It's something that's near and dear to my heart. I've seen it up close, going back to my first days in politics and government. And I would hope that somebody in Washington would think maybe this isn't the right message to send, or somebody in power down there at the time when people don't trust us. The way to ensure that people trust us is we hold governmental institutions accountable when they need to be held accountable. We ensure that we act with the highest standards of integrity, and we deliver the results for people. Instead, what are we doing? We're jacking up their healthcare costs. We're taking food off their table, and they're rewarding themselves. I don't want to say we, because I'm not doing this. They're rewarding themselves for supposed harms, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Go ask the average SNAP recipient who might have a couple $100s on their EBT card, whether they like $500,000 to pay for their food. I think I know the answer to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are honored to have you on here from the great state of New Jersey. I'm glad you called me out on the title of our podcast. And I often get when we do the podcast live, I often get the questions, what does that AF stand for again?
Not in New Jersey, you won't.
I would say, New Jersey Attorney General Matt Platkin leading the charge along with 22 other Democratic attorneys general. And if red state attorneys general were doing their part, I would call them out and compliment them too. And the reason I'm not doing it is because they're not. They never join the cases, even though they benefit from it. They draft behind your work. And it's really disgusting because many, for instance, in SNAP, many of that 42 million and 16 million children reside in classic red states.
for
And
sure.
yet it's the blue states attorneys general, because you don't see color and you don't see political stripe when it comes to basic needs and dignity of American people.
Yeah, look, I sued the Biden administration. This isn't hard. If this were the Harris administration withholding food from 850,000 New Jerseyans, you better believe my name would be on those papers. And so to me, this isn't a partisan thing. We didn't swear an oath to only protect Democrats or Republicans. We swore an oath to protect every resident of our state. And I know I'm doing my job. I know that's what we're doing. I would hope everyone would wake up and do theirs.
Yeah. And thank you for being here. We'll see you next week in Arizona for a series of interviews about these very issues, about what the attorneys general are doing to help the American people, since the Department of Justice has abdicated all responsibility in that regard. Thanks for being here on a special edition of Legal AF. I'm Michael Popok. Take a moment, hit the free subscribe button, and help us continue to grow this pro-democracy channel. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.